So welcome everyone to your coaching tutorial. This is the first of three for the coaching module. My name's Linda Vizzoli. I'm your online tutor. So whenever you email tutor@thehealthcoach.com, that's me. I'm also a health coach and a nutritional therapist. And if you started the coaching module, you'll probably have seen me in the lecture recordings. So you're starting the coaching module now, which is the exciting part of the course, is where you're starting to put all of your, all of the theory into practice. And this module is slightly different to the other modules in the sense that it is more, there's going to be more practical exercises that are happening and more practical assessments. You don't have an exam in this coaching module as opposed to the other ones or an assignment. Well, actually, you do have an assignment. You're going to be actually coaching people now. So you're going to be putting things into practice and you're going to be doing some coaching sessions. The idea behind this is that we want you to hit the ground running when you finish your course. You won't feel as intimidated, hopefully, to start coaching people because you will have already practiced on 5 people actually by the end of the coaching module. So there is, as you probably know, and you've seen emails from Vicky, there are clinic dates that are going to be that need to be booked. Because you are, for a number of your coaching sessions, you're going to be actually be observed online on Zoom by a tutor, and you're going to be given feedback and you're going to be assessed on your coaching skills. Now, as nerve-wracking as that is, the purpose really is for you to practice as much as possible. We don't expect you to be a, brilliant coach straight off the bat. You have 4 cases that you're going to be taking, 4 clients for an initial and a follow-up. So you'll be seeing them over 2 sessions. And, in order to pass the coaching module, you need to be competent in 2 of the 4 cases. So we don't expect you to be, get a competency across all of the cases. If there is something that happens, and if there's things that maybe you might stumble on in the case, in the case taking, don't worry about it. We don't expect you to be perfect from the get-go. This is your opportunity to practice and to get feedback from, qualified health coaches on your coaching skills, and also for you to kind of refine your coaching skills during this time. Now before you actually get assessed, we do give you a chance to practice on one of your peers. It's what's called the CPA, the Coaching Practical Assessment. You need to do this. Ideally, we say, can you please do this before you start seeing your clients? You have in your clinics tile of your Moodle, of your student portal, you have a clinics timetable that has dates available for your intake that can be booked for your CPA, and then for your 2 clients, client 1 and client 2, initial and a follow-up. So the CPA and the initials are both 1 hour long. In this time, you need to kind of take your client through the case taking form, take their case history, and then co-create a plan together with them. And then the follow-ups are half an hour long. So you kind of, once you've co-created a plan, after a couple of weeks, normally with coaching, you want to see clients quite frequently. So you would say, no longer than 2 weeks' time. Then you would do a half an hour follow-up where you would kind of, go through how they've been and then sort of co-create a plan together. After each session, you're kind of, every time you do a session with a client, you're creating a plan together, like a to-do list that they're going to be putting, that they're going to be putting into practice before they see you again. So those 3, the CPA, client 1 and client 2, you will do online on Zoom, where you'll be observed. As I said, if you go into the clinics folder, there's a timetable there to show all the available dates. And there's also an instruction, step-by-step instruction PDF about how to actually book in your clinics, because you need to actually book yourself in to the clinic day and then book in your client during this time. And then you have 2 more clients, client 3 and client 4, that you do an initial and a follow-up to get with. But you will do those at home in your own time. So those don't get observed in real time on Zoom. You can do them at your own pace. but you will need to upload everything to the system, like the paperwork that then gets marked, by a tutor, usually me, by the 30th of September. So you've got a bit of time, you've got the whole summer to work your way through these. The CPAs, clients 1 and clients 2, you will also need to write up your notes and upload them by the 30th of September. You will not get sort of like the notes aren't going to be marked, but we want to have them up on the system so that we've got everything. You will get verbal feedback on the day of the CPA and your clients 1 and clients 2. You'll get verbal feedback from the tutor to tell you whether this case was marked as competent or not yet competent. Obviously with the CPA, you only have 1 session, so you'll know off the bat. With client 1 and client 2, we will tell you, so far it's competent. And then, provided that the follow-up is competent, then the whole case is considered competent as well. There's various sort of criteria that we look at when we are assessing you, things like the kind of questions that you're asking, do you have good rapport with the client? The main things that we're looking at is, are you coaching the client or are you telling the client what to do? Because there's a difference between coaching and telling someone what to do. That's not what we do as coaches. So obviously you can give recommendations and suggestions if the client doesn't know what needs to be done. But it's not like, the client comes, tells you, you take a case history, they tell you all their problems, and then you go, right, this is what you have to do to fix it. That's not what coaching is. It's like a two-way street. So we want to see that. We want to see you involving the client in the coaching session, asking them questions. What do you think we should get started on? What do you want to get started on? Or what have you done in the past to approach, to solve this issue? What's worked, what hasn't worked? What do you think we should be doing? A lot of the times clients already have the answers, but they haven't been able to put them into practice, or they haven't been able, most often what I see is they're not able to stay consistent. And so having a coach in their corner can help with that sort of consistency, accountability, etc. So working together with them. And even if you are making suggestions like, they need to drink more water, for example, get the client involved into like, how are they going to make it happen? So are they going to have a bottle on their desk? Are they going to have their secretary bring it in? Are they going to have a reminder on their phone that bugs them every hour? That's going to look different for different people. So you want to get the client involved. There are some cases that I've been observing where I've seen the coach just go, okay, so this is what you do, and then this is what you do, and then this is what you do. And that's like, no, that is, that will be considered not yet competent. I've also seen some cases where at the end of the session, the coach says, okay, thank you very much. I'll send you the plan tomorrow, not co-creating anything with the client. That's also like a no-no. So that's what we're looking for when we're observing your cases. Are you co-creating the plan with the client? Are you coaching them, or are you just telling them what to do? And the other big thing that we're looking at is obviously whether you're staying within your scope of practice as a health coach. Now, I'm happy to go through the scope of practice. Are you familiar with the document? It's in your, student portal. Did you want me to kind of go through it again? Yes, Donna.
Hi. Sorry, Donna's actually my daughter's name.
Oh, sorry.
I know, and I don't know how to change it. I'm so bad with
Okay, no problem.
So, if you on that, if you can just clarify for us in terms of the what we're allowed to recommend to patients, because obviously we've just been through the whole nutrition study and we really worked so hard on learning magnesium and zinc and all that sort of thing. And then you can't recommend it, or it's like so just what is it that in terms of vitamins, minerals, those sort of things, what is it that we're allowed to suggest? And what is it that we're not allowed to do? So in that...
No worries. Yeah, absolutely. So with supplements and herbs and nutraceuticals, they can be very helpful, to help to restore an imbalance. If someone is, super deficient in a certain nutrient, they can be quite helpful to restore an imbalance. Herbs are fantastic. They are, they can be very powerful as well. I mean, most medications are derived from herbs. They're like the synthesized form of a lot of these forms of nutrients and herbs, etc. However, when you recommend, when you take supplements, first there's a few things that need to be taken into consideration. First of all, could they interact with any medication that the client is already taking, especially herbs, but also supplements as well? They can interact with medications. And so this is something that you need to be trained in. When you study nutrition, for example, we do days on pharmacology, nutrient drug interaction, herbs, etc., supplements in practice. There's different forms of the nutrients as well. There's like magnesium glycinate, magnesium malate, magnesium citrate. They're not the same, and they serve different purposes. Not to mention probiotics. There's like 1,000 different strains. What works for one person for one thing doesn't work for another. You actually haven't been trained. Whilst you've been told sort of generally magnesium is good for this and vitamin C is good for that, you haven't been trained in the actual sort of like nutraceutical part of it. And you haven't been trained to check for interactions, and also different life stages. If someone's got blood pressure, or there's certain herbs that wouldn't be helpful for that. If someone's pregnant or breastfeeding, a lot of herbs and supplements aren't suitable for them. So that's why it's outside of the scope of a health coach to recommend these supplements and herbs in supplemental forms. So things like capsules, powders, tinctures, those kind of things. But you can definitely recommend these nutrients in food form. Food form is the form that actually has less risks of causing imbalances or interacting with medication. There's a caveat. If someone's on something like warfarin, then even foods can actually interact, like broccoli or something can actually interact. So warfarin is one of the sort of exceptions that if they're on this medication, you need to be super, super careful even with foods. But in general, if you're recommending magnesium-rich foods, it's much less likely to cause an imbalance than if you're recommending a magnesium supplement that they take in a capsule, powder, liquid form. Supplements themselves, they don't work, nutrients, as we know, don't work in isolation. And so even if you say, for example, someone takes zinc, because like during COVID times, everybody's like mega dosing on zinc, right? Because it's like, oh, it's really important for immune system health. But zinc, doesn't work in isolation. And actually, it's an antagonist for another mineral called copper. And, if you're taking loads of zinc just on its own in a capsule form, you could be depleting your copper stores. And if you have low copper, then that can impact your ability to break down histamine. It can impact your ability to utilize iron, etc. So you could create potentially like anemia by taking loads of zinc and copper. And again, these are things that you haven't been trained to do. And so it's outside of the scope of practice for a health coach. But if you, for example, to eat zinc-rich foods, a lot of zinc-rich foods like seafood, for example, have zinc and copper in them. Foods contain all their little cofactors and and sort of like nutrients that work together. So it's much less likely to cause an imbalance than taking something in a capsule or pill or liquid form. But the main thing that I want you to think, because every time we talk about supplements, I always get students trying to find the loophole. Well, what about ashwagandha? What about spirulina? What about bee pollen? Bee pollen is a food, it's okay. But again, you shouldn't be taking too much of it during pregnancy. It can cause uterine contractions, etc. So we need to be careful. The main thing I want you to think about when you're feeling like your hands are tied because you can't recommend supplements is that one of the main things that we do as health coaches is we are here to change behaviors. We are here to help our clients change their behavior, change their daily habits that they've been doing on a regular basis for weeks, months, years, decades that have brought them to where they are now. And taking a supplement, whilst it can help to, address an imbalance or something like that, it doesn't encourage change. You know, you see people, I see people, my clients, some of my clients that take a supplement list as long as my arm, but then they're just living in chaos. And so the supplements, yeah, it might be helping, but it's kind of just like a little plaster. It's not actually bringing like deep rooted change. And I always make the analogy that, you know, if you're stressed to the gills, you know, you're burnt out, you're stressed to the max, you can't say no to anything, you're taking too much on, you're, you know, working your butt off, you're not sleeping at night, all this kind of stuff, and you're like super stressed. The symptoms that you're experiencing are not down to an ashwagandha deficiency. They're due to the life that you're living, right? So as ashwagandha, as powerful as it is, yes, it can help mitigate some of the symptoms, but what we want to be doing is looking at the day to day and like, where can we make some changes? You know, maybe we need to set boundaries. Maybe we need to prioritize sleep. Maybe we need to stop looking at our phones, you know, at night to kind of, or drinking alcohol to wind down from a stressful day. That's what's going to bring true healing and health versus taking supplements. So if a client asks you about supplements, you know, you can just say, look, because obviously the problem is that most people just go into a shop and buy it. You know, it's unregulated. You can just you know, self-prescribe, take stuff. But you know, what I normally would say is, you know, tell your client, like, look, yeah, they can be great, but we're looking to make some long-lasting changes in habits. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. And obviously nutrition, the food is the first place. Like, you know, as I said, you get foods, nutrients from food source. It's going to have all its cofactors. You're nourishing yourself versus taking a supplement. I remember actually I worked as a nutrition consultant for a supplement company a while back when I first qualified as a nutritionist. And I had, you know, one of the ladies that I worked with, she was taking like 1,000 different things. She was like taking the wheat crush powder and this supplement and that supplement. And she was taking 1,000 things. And after a few months working, I kind of like stopped and looked, and I was observed like, this woman, I've never seen her eat anything. All she does all day is pound powders, powders, shots, pills, liquids, you know, tinctures. And I was like, she was so stressed, she had lots of health issues, etc. And I was like, maybe if she just ate some food, you know, maybe she would feel a bit better. But, you know, you kind of get, supplements are very exciting. They're shiny, you know, they promise you, you know, vibrant health without having to make any changes in your day to day. And that's kind of the main thing that I would say, you know, what we want to push back on is, you know, we're making changes here. We're making changes in our daily habits. That's going to bring true lasting health. So I would actually, you know, be very clear about that with your clients. And if they do mention supplements in sessions, please don't discuss them. You know, that I have seen in some of the sessions, people say, oh yeah, vitamin D, that would be good for you. It's like, well, how do you know? You haven't tested their vitamin D levels. You don't know. Vitamin D is actually a hormone. You know, we can't just kind of just take it willy-nilly. We need to have tests done. There are times in our year where we're naturally low in vitamin D. You're taking it can actually deplete your magnesium stores if you're not, you know, if you're not doing it properly. So yeah, just be mindful of that and just focus on the food sources of these nutrients. Culinary herbs are fine. Teas are okay. It's just like the powders, the tinctures, the capsules, those kind of things. They can cause issues if we don't regulate, you know, if we're not trained to recommend them. The other thing in terms of scope of practice is with the diet. Again, in the Nutrition for Everyday Living, there are some things that are, you know, or in the first module, How the Body Works, there are some protocols outlined for specific conditions. And, you know, again, this is something that we need to be careful of when we are working with our clients, that we are absolutely within our scope to give them some recommendations about their diets, like how to improve their diet, but we cannot give detailed dietary protocols, specifically elimination of foods. So especially dietary protocols that eliminate foods, because again, you haven't been trained in, you know, things that potential nutrient deficiencies that may cause, and also how to introduce these foods again after eliminating them. Some people, I speak to people sometimes that are like, oh, I went to, I haven't eaten, whatever, this food for 20 years because I went to an osteopath or this. My acupuncturist told me 20 years ago that to not eat this food, and I haven't had it since. And whilst a lot of times some people do react to certain foods, and they might feel like a relief in their symptoms temporarily when they take it out. What this does as well is that it's not similar like supplements, it's not addressing the root cause. Most of the time, the reason why someone is reacting to a food, unless obviously they have an allergy, obviously, but most of the time the reason why someone has an intolerance to a food or is reacting to a food is not because of the food itself, but it's because of the digestive system that it's going into. There's something going on with the digestion, and it's trying to get your attention, and so it's reacting to this food. You take it out, you feel your symptoms are relieved. But then what I often see is if you're not addressing the root cause, you'll start reacting to other foods again, so you'll take foods out and then you'll start to react to other foods that you're eating on a regular basis because you're not addressing the digestive issue, right? So that's kind of, we need to be a bit mindful of that. There's loads of protocols out there that are very, restrictive, things that, they cut out like whole food groups, or, there's things like the FODMAP diet and the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet and vegan diets and things like that. These are not things that we have been trained to support our clients through, and especially through the reintroduction of these foods. So I would say if someone is experiencing issues with foods, we want to be looking at, they can reduce the amount, but you want to work on, healing the gut at the same time. And what is going, especially with digestive issues, oftentimes things are exacerbated by stress. So is the client eating in a stressed, are they stressed during the day? Are they eating in a stressed environment? Are they just kind of like chugging their food as they're going about their daily life, eating in the car in between meetings? Their digestive issues may not be because of the food, but also how they're eating. Are they chewing their food? Are they taking their time to get into a parasympathetic mode before they eat, etc.? So focus on all of these things rather than thinking about protocols. Now, whilst you can't give detailed dietary advice or create meal plans, for example, like on Monday, have this for breakfast, this for lunch, this for dinner, we do actually encourage you to recommend ideas for meals with your clients and recipes. That is all within your scope. It's not like you can't give any dietary advice. So say, for example, the client hasn't had breakfast for however many years, or they're eating like Frosties for breakfast, and they've agreed that one of their actions is they're going to have breakfast from now on. It's completely within your scope to give them ideas for balanced breakfast. Share recipes for healthy snacks, recipes that contain foods that they might want to include into their diet, but they've never cooked with before. That is completely fine. You just can't write detailed meal plans like, this day, on this day, have this much. The reason behind that is because in order to write a meal plan, you need to be able to know how to work out how many calories does this person need to eat per day. What is their macronutrient breakdown? Like how many grams of carbs, protein, and fats do they need? And then put a plan together with the portion sizes that actually meets their daily requirements of macronutrients and micronutrients. This is something you haven't been trained to do, but also as a trained nutritionist, I will tell you, it's an absolute nightmare to do. I have done that with a couple of clients who've asked me specifically for meal plans. And you're there sort of inputting all of the foods into a meal, into a food tracker, making sure that all the meals are balanced, that overall the day is the right amount for them, and the carbs and proteins and fats and blah, blah, blah. It takes forever, and it's something that you haven't been trained to do. Also, I find that meal plans specifically are quite restrictive. If you're saying on this day you need to eat these foods, to be able to meet all your nutrient needs, they might do it for like 1 or 2 days, but then they're like, oh, I don't feel like eating chicken thigh today, or oh, I don't have any fish in my fridge, so then I need to find something else. It can be quite restrictive. Whereas if you give them ideas, okay, look, these are some breakfast ideas, here are some lunch ideas, here are some snack ideas, then they can kind of mix and match those and eat the quantities that feels right for them. And obviously, if they need more detailed advice on like how much should I be eating, what are my macronutrient needs, etc., they would need to work with someone that's able to write these up for them. But yeah, there's lots that you can do, within your scope by giving them all these resources and ideas. Absolutely. Does that make sense? Oh, the other thing to keep in mind as well is just to, outside of scope again, because you haven't been trained to do this, is ordering or interpreting blood tests or any sort of diagnostic tests. Again, the clients may come to you with test results from their GP or whatever. You need to be able to interpret these tests in order to be able to give them some advice. Sometimes the interpretation, even of blood tests, is not that straightforward. Sometimes you might see a low marker of something, but it could be due to something else. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because you've got low iron, you need more iron. It could be that you have low copper, and actually that's causing the iron to not be released from the stores in the tissues, for example. So it's not a case of just taking loads of iron or eating more iron-rich foods, etc. So this is something that's outside of your scope. There are, diagnostic tests that people can order themselves as consumers, that then get interpreted by a lab technician or a nutritionist or something like that. That's offered by the brand that's offering these tests. You could then help the client implement the recommendations that are given to you, to them by these diagnostic testing companies, for example. So yeah, just wanted to just make sure of that. Sometimes I do see students saying, oh, I think, or diagnosing a little bit, saying, oh, it looks like your thyroid is low, you need to go and get it checked by the GP. We need to be very careful with the wording as well. Nobody other than a medical doctor can diagnose any sort of condition. So, you could say, speak to your GP about these symptoms, like, low energy, cold hands and feet, constipation. That could be very, very often could be a clear sign of hypothyroidism, but you can't say, I think you've got hypothyroidism, you need to go and get your thyroid tested. So just be mindful of your wording when you're working with your clients. Any questions about the CPA? The scope of practice?
Can I just ask? So throughout our lectures, it heavily says how dairy is something that's not best for our health. And there are like other alternatives such as like kefir or plant-based milks, for example.
Yeah.
Say we've got a health coaching session and somebody comes to you and they notice symptoms that from having dairy. So we can't necessarily say we can't eliminate it, but can we suggest that if they're noticing that they've got patterns where dairy is impacting their health, can we do like a short-term elimination, or can we suggest like perhaps try plant-based milks because they'll be better on the body? Is that something that we can say, knowing basically?
I wouldn't say elimination. So again, very mindful of your wording when you're working with your clients, because this is something that we take very seriously because of the scope. So I wouldn't say elimination. You could say maybe you could swap out whatever, if they're consuming a lot of dairy and they're finding that it's impacting their health with something else. You can give them some recommendations of alternatives, but just be mindful to don't eliminate or remove or things like that. Again, with dairy, a lot of people do struggle with dairy, especially milk. It's quite hard to digest because it has a lot of lactose, and it can be sometimes genetically people, from a genetic point of view, they don't have the enzyme to digest lactose in adulthood, or a lot of times if thyroid function is really low, or if they're under a lot of stress, then they might, their digestive system is kind of in distress. And so that makes it harder to consume certain foods. But for example, a lot of people are able to digest fermented dairy in, like kefir or yogurt in a better way. So, or cheese, for example. So it depends. So, you want to check with the client and see if they're super stressed, if you're just taking the dairy out, as I said before, you're not addressing the root cause of the issue. I'm not denying that people do have problems with dairy because it can be hard to digest, as things like, grains, for example, like bread and gluten. But I don't think necessarily it's the issue with the food. A lot of times it's the problem. The problem is the digestive system that it's going into. There's also sometimes just from a I'm trying to think of the word. I can't think, the word's not coming to my mind. Just from a cultural point of view as well. So certain cultures don't consume a lot of dairy as part of their ancestral diet. So for example, my husband's half Chinese Malay. They don't eat a lot of dairy in Malaysia. So if he has too much dairy, it does impact his digestion. I'm from northern Italy, where we got cheese and cows all over the place. And so for me, dairy is, is a food that I can genetically, actually, when I did genetic testing, I have that gene that allows me to digest dairy in adulthood. But there was a time in my life, especially in my early 20s, where I was severely dairy intolerant. And I'd had any sort of dairy and I would just, my guts would explode, so it was not a pretty picture. But after I worked on my gut, after I worked on my thyroid and things like that, I was able to kind of reintroduce it into my diet with no sort of ill effects. So it's not as, black and white as we kind of make it out to be, where it's like, this food is the devil, this food is is not. Everybody's going to be different depending on where they are in their health journey, where, their ethnicity, their digestive tract. So just let's kind of move away from sort of like dogmatic views and just focus on the person that's in front of you and what's going on with them and how do we help them and in this particular moment in time, versus just having sort of like specific ideas of what one should or shouldn't eat. Does that make sense? All right.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at some questions. I'm sorry. So Mims is saying, for the CPA, is it role play or real, since we are student or more likely one, healthy, two, have been exposed to the same information? It seems strange to start the conversation with my role as a health coach and how can I help you when they don't necessarily have issues? Well, aren't we all perfect now? Are we all that perfect? I don't think so. I think everyone has something that they can work on, to be honest. I mean, if you're perfect, then that's great. But I think if you feel like you have no issues, it's completely fine to make things up and role play. Or if you don't want to talk about yourself, your private life, that's fine too. But I find that there's always something that someone can be working on. Remember, as health coaches, and when we're doing our consultation, it's not just about things like diet. Again, this is the other thing. As health coaches, we are zooming out of and looking at the client's life as a whole. You may have I say this in quotation marks because I don't think no such thing exists, but you may have the perfect diet. You may be very consistent with your movement or whatever it is that you have, but overall in your life, what's your life like? Are there areas that can be improved? And there's always, I feel like, scope for improvement with anybody, to be honest, things that they might want to be working on. I observed a CPA consultation where one of the client there said that one of the things that she wanted to work on was to stop her online shopping addiction. She was like really, she spent a lot of time on the phone, she would buy lots of stuff, and then she was a bit, obviously it would stress her out because I had a financial toll, etc. You could see the health coach going, oh my God, what am I going to do here? Because they were thinking diet, sleep, stress, and this woman's like, I want to stop my shopping. But it was really interesting because obviously what we're there to do, we're helping clients make changes in their day-to-day habits. This was obviously causing them stress and financial distress as well. So they explored things like, what is it that made her, made her decide to go shopping, what kind of things could she replace that habit with? What are some goals that she had? And she said, she wanted to read more books, for example. So one of the actions that they put together is that she would create this little reading nook, and in the evenings, instead of having her phone where she would kind of start scrolling through websites and start shopping, she would she would read her book, and they would track the days in which she didn't go. And I think they also talk about maybe like blocking apps or deleting the newsletters, that you get from these brands go, hey, 40% off, all these kind of things. So there's always something that we can work on to improve our overall habits in a day-to-day world. But yeah, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you can make things up. That's completely fine as well. But I think it'd be helpful to actually genuinely think about something that you might want some help with, that any sort of habit or changes that you want to implement in your day-to-day. A lot of times people struggle with consistency. Yeah, I would say I would take advantage of that. Selena says, what about the huge rise in Ozempic and the like? How do we deal with that if someone is on it or coming off of it? Is there any advice to offer us as health coaches? Yeah, that's quite tricky now. So the thing about Ozempic or, the similar medication is that, yeah, it's very widely prescribed now. A lot of people can get it very easily. Whilst it has its uses in certain cases, I think that the way that it's being used nowadays is a little bit, I'm trying to think of the word again, I can't think of it. Just, oh God, the word's just completely gone. Just not very mindful or intentional. It can be irresponsible. That's the word I was thinking of. Irresponsible. The problem with things like this is that, the reason why they work so well for weight loss is the main sort of symptoms that people experience when they take this medication is they just don't have they're not hungry anymore, right? So it really curbs their hunger. Some other people actually experience nausea, diarrhea, and so you're not going to want to eat when you're spending all day on the toilet, right? So it's not magic. You're just not eating and you're losing weight because of it. And obviously it can cause it can be helpful in sort of severe situations. If someone is like, really obese and they're putting their life at risk, then absolutely. But if you're losing weight at such a quick rate because you're not eating, you're not just losing fat, you are also losing muscle mass. And that's going to have a long-term implication. Like obviously, the less muscle mass we have, the lower our metabolic rate is going to be. And so if we, say for example, we were able to maintain our weight on 2,500 calories a day, and then after Ozempic, we've lost like 100 pounds, but we've lost loads of muscle mass, then, it might be that afterwards, when we go back to eating normally, our metabolic rate is now 1,500 calories a day. And so if you eat anything above that, you're going to put on weight, and most of the time you put on fat. So that's going to then have its own metabolic issues, etc. So I think long term, that can actually cause a lot more issues. So it's important for the client to be aware of this. And so if someone is on it, I would say it's really crucial that they exercise and, maintain the muscle mass that they have so that they're not losing it. So, will be different for different people, but the kind of catch-22 here is that if you want to maintain the muscle mass that you have, it's going to be very hard for you to put on more muscle mass if you're in a severe caloric deficit, because you actually need to you need to eat a lot to put muscle on. So if you're like not eating anything all day long or having like half a sausage roll, like I've heard some of the people that are on it tell me like, all I had yesterday was half a sausage roll. It's going to be hard to put on muscle, but at least, I would say the main thing we want to focus on is make sure that you are maintaining the muscle mass that you have. So they need to exercise and do weight-bearing exercises. But a lot of people, because they're like, well, I'm losing weight, I don't need to go to the gym, or they might not feel great because they've got diarrhea or nausea, it's going to be hard. So it can be a little bit tricky for that. And obviously making sure that they're eating enough protein so that they are, maintaining the muscle mass that they have versus, losing that and then being in a worse off than they were before when they finish. So I think those are the two things that I would say are the main things that we would want to focus on to help our clients who are on it. But the other thing is also, it's really important for people to understand. And again, I'm not talking about everyone because there is a place for this medication if used responsibly. But most people are just so into just getting results really quickly. And so that's where the appeal of something like this is. And what we're trying to do with our clients is to help create long-lasting habit changes. And sometimes things like fat loss can take time. It can take years to get to where you want to be. So it really depends on the person, but it's important for them to understand that sometimes 12 months in the grand scheme of things of like decades of yo-yo dieting is not that long, and actually it can be it's something that can actually bring long-term health if you in those 12 months implement habits that you become the person that goes to the gym 3 times a week, that meal preps their food and is ensuring that they eat enough throughout the day, and they're prioritizing their sleep, and they're taking, walking a certain amount of steps every day. That is what's going to give you that long-term health and, the body that you love or that you're aspiring to, rather than like crash diets, 12-week challenges, or something like Ozempic as well. So we would want to educate our clients, and it's not for everyone. A lot of people aren't ready for that. They're like, no, I want to see the results straight away, I'm out. But this is where doing something like a discovery call can be helpful to kind of set expectations. I would not work with someone that is, taking this medication just as a quick fix, because that's not the approach that I take with my clients, and it's not the kind of person I want to be working on, to be honest. But if someone's like, yeah, let's, maybe they're taking it, but there's, in very, very small doses, but they're willing to make all these other changes, then, yes, then that could be something that we could work together to do. But yeah, I've been on my own journey in the last sort of year, building muscle and, work. I'm part of my own, I have my own coach. So I joined a coaching program, and this coaching program that I joined last year, you can only sign up for 12 months. That's the minimum amount that you can sign up for, because they say it takes 12 months to make long-lasting changes, to see some results, around this time. They don't promise anything in like 3 weeks or whatever it is that a lot of times you see, right? So signed up 12 months. I wanted to make, obviously I'm a nutritionist, and I have been quite consistent with my exercise in the gym, but I wasn't really seeing the results that I wanted. And, I turned 50 tomorrow. So I was like, okay, I want to make some changes. I want to, why don't I look the way I want to look despite being consistent, And my coach looks at me and she's like, you don't have enough muscle. And I was like, oh, but I do. I go to the gym. I can feel it. It's there somewhere. She's like, no, you don't have enough. She's like, how much can you deadlift? I was like, well, I don't know. I've never deadlifted in my life. She's like, okay, let's work on muscle building first, and then we can talk about potentially some fat loss or whatever it is. So she said to me, I want you to build muscle. I want you to go to the gym, and I want you to start deadlifting. And I want you to be able to deadlift 120 kilos, which is twice, just under twice my body weight. And then we can talk about, potentially doing a fat loss phase. And I was like, okay, never deadlifted in my life, never been to that bit of the gym in my life, didn't even know how to load a barbell. I had to look it up on YouTube. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. Went in, did it. I would video myself, send it to my coach. She would give me, feedback every week. And we kind of worked on that. So I strapped in, I was like, I've got 12 months to do this, right? I was tracking my food, doing the exercises, training 3 times a week, and, got better as I went along, and, fell in love with the process at the same time as well. Like, I actually love powerlifting now. And about 8 months in, well, actually, let's say about 3 months in, I started to realize that, because I train Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I realized that on Thursdays I was absolutely ravenous, and, getting to the point where I just wanted to like raid the covers. And I talked to my coach about it. She's like, okay, so you're working out Mondays and Wednesdays. We need to increase your calories because you're building more muscle. So your metabolic rate is going up. So you need to eat more. So we increased my calories even more. So I'm eating like 2,300 calories a day. The cravings disappeared miraculously after that. Carried on doing it. About 8 months in, 9 months, I actually managed to lift 120 kilos. And yay, makes me feel like an absolute badass, by the way. And my body composition had changed by that point, obviously, as well, because obviously I'm building muscle right underneath. So I'm starting to look the way I want to look. And at this point, my coach was like, okay, maybe we can consider a fat loss phase. What's your stress levels like at the moment? And I was like, I am really busy. I am so stressed. This was about February time. I was really, really busy, very, it was February as well, so it was dark at night, in the mornings. I couldn't really go out for walks and things like that. She's like, okay, this is not the right time. Carry on training, we'll see. And then around April time, when things started to slow down, not as stressed, it's light outside, I can get up and go for walks, I can get my steps in throughout the day. She's like, okay, now we can think about doing a caloric deficit. Your training stays where it is. You're not going to try and get stronger each time. So you set your weights, you stay at the same weights, because you're not working on building muscle now, you're working on maintaining the muscle that you built, and you go into a slight caloric deficit. and then you're just kind of like maintaining what you've done, so far. But looking at, I started in July, so I'm coming up to a year. I started in July, and we started the fat loss phase in like late April. So it's like almost, and by the time I finish the fat loss phase, it's probably going to be August, September time. So it's going to be like over 12, 13 months into this process. And then we kind of build on going back up to maintenance and then building more muscle after that. But it takes that long to actually start to see. And this is someone that, I was consistent before already. I was consistent with my workouts. I thought I was consistent with my food, but probably not so much. So it takes that long, and I think people don't realize how long it takes. But also, when you learn these skills and you build, you create that muscle, you actually have the body that that most women say, I want to look toned. You need muscle in order to look toned. And so you need to, it's a process that you need to commit to doing over a longer period of time. And that's what I think a lot of people struggle with, is that they're not consistent for long periods of time, or they just want to see things too quickly, and that's not going to bring long lasting results. But anyway, sorry, I thought I'd share my journey, because I just found it very enlightening for me, and also when I work with my clients, to understand just how long it takes and just how hard it actually is to build muscle, how much you need to eat to build muscle as well. It's not just like, I'm just going to eat 1,200 calories and get shredded. No, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Anyways, so yeah, that's what I would say when you're working with clients that are on these sort of fat loss journeys. Do we do food diary for CPA? Yes, you can do that as well. So I think I'll talk about the forms in a second. Can you suggest food diary so the client can link symptoms? Yeah, absolutely. They can also do that. Not a problem at all. Food mood and food mood diaries or food mood symptom diaries are great if someone is trying to. I think the mood is important as well, because sometimes people experience symptoms when they're mostly under stress, and then when they're on holiday, they don't experience these issues. So it's also like, what part of the day and how are you feeling during this time is important to understand as well, because a lot of symptoms are triggered by stress. So yeah, that's absolutely completely fine to recommend. So coaching scope, we talked about it. The CPA, so CPA and clients 1 and 2 you do online. You need to book those into your clinics. You'll be observed and you'll be given feedback on the day. The forms that you need to fill out for the CPA is the case taking form and the case taking procedure form. So the case taking procedure form is basically just your outline of how to conduct a case. It has the prompts to the questions and the different sections. You would then type up these notes in your case taking form. Make sure you type them up with the different sections as well, and be detailed about your notes as well, because now you're only seeing like 4 people, but when you start seeing 10, 20, 50 people, you won't remember what you talked about in the session. So sometimes I see in the notes things like health concerns, weight gain, but there's no like, how long have they, how long has it been? How much weight have they gained? In what time frame? Is it a lifelong issue? Is it something that's happened recently? It's going to be different according to the health history. If someone has headaches, how often do they get them? Do they have any known triggers? Anything that makes it better? What do they take if they get a headache? You want to have that information. So ask those questions, the follow-up questions, but also put that information in the notes as well. So you do the CPA, the case taking procedure. You go through the food. So I would suggest sending a food diary out to your clients to fill in. It's just nice and insightful, but if not, you can just talk through the day. What's your day look like? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then you do the nutrition checklist. So how many meals do they have a day? Are there any, do they eat microwave meals? Do they eat soy products, etc.? And then are there any changes that they want to do in any, implement in any of these areas? Then you do the life assessment. Now, for these cases, you do not need to do any of the coaching practicals. So you don't need to do the Wheel of Life. You don't need to do the, how to find time, all this kind of stuff, especially not in the sessions that are being observed, because you only have an hour. We don't want to add extra pressure to you, because we want to give you the time, especially as you're first starting out. So you don't need to do any of these things. I would suggest practicing them anyway, so you could maybe give it to them as homework to do that you can then discuss in the follow-up. or, or maybe do it with someone else, in another session, or do it with the clients that you see at home, for example, if you've got more time, because they are interesting tools to use with your clients to help them work through certain issues. But yeah, for the case taking, you don't have to do these. It's not a requirement, but practice if you can. And then obviously you would co-create the plan with the client. So what are we going to do? And really, when you're looking at co-creating a plan, remember, you're seeing them in 2 weeks' time. So don't try to make too many changes at once. Focus on 3, 4 at the most. I would say 3 is a good number to go for. 3 practical actions that they're going to take. It can be 1 food, 1 movement, 1 lifestyle, or it can be 3 foods, whatever that is. But, don't give them too much to do at once. People get very motivated when they do the session, or you feel like you need to come up with lots of ideas to give them their, money's worth. But remember, when you see clients, you're going to be seeing them over a period of months. And so it's not realistic or sustainable for them to make too many changes at once. We've all done it, right? January 1st comes along. We're like, that's it. I'm overhauling my life. No sugar, no booze. I'm going to the gym every day. I'm throwing my phone out the window, doing all these things. You start off with the best intentions. You do it for 2 weeks, and then you have a really crappy day at work, and you're like, back to the wine, whatever it is. And their studies show 19th of January is usually the time when most New Year's resolutions fail. And that is because most people try to do too much at once. If you were to say, okay, January, I'm going to spend the whole month, maybe dry January, I'm not going to drink. And then the following months, I'm going to implement a workout routine where I go for a walk every day. And then in March, I'm going to maybe start going to the gym a couple of times a week. That's going to be so much more, you're much more likely to stick to these resolutions and to stick to these new habits if you're only focusing on one thing at a time. So be mindful of that with your clients. I often see things like so many dietary changes at once, take out this and, like no process. Maybe they go from like really processed diet, which we know is not ideal, but then it's very unrealistic to expect someone that eats, buys everything out, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to then start cooking all of their meals from scratch. They might start off doing it, but it's going to be hard for them to maintain that. So maybe it's just breakfast is something that they make at home and everything else stays the same. And then next time you see them, lunch, we add in lunch. And then the next time we add in dinner. So, meet the client where they're at, obviously discuss it with them, put it together. I put a coaching plan together with them, what feels right. Sometimes when I'm observing cases, the coach makes a suggestion and then the client goes, yeah, maybe. And I could already tell, like, they're not going to do this. There's no buy-in. If someone says, yeah, that sounds good. I think I'll definitely do that. I can definitely do that. But if they go, maybe, yeah, don't put that on the plan. Just, work out with them. Okay, maybe that's unrealistic. What sounds good to you? What's realistic for you to implement? And then go with that. So just be mindful of that, see your client's response to some of the things when you're putting together the plan. So 3 things at the most, I would say. Don't put too many things at once. You can keep notes of other stuff, in your own notes. Oh yeah, next time we'll talk, this will be good, this will be good. Maybe they need to stop drinking, stop smoking, whatever it is. And it's something that you can discuss in future sessions. But, start off with easy wins that are going to set the client up for success. And that's going to motivate them as well, because obviously if they come back and they've done everything and they feel good about it, it's going to also create that trust that you then have, with you. And, it's going to also build momentum rather than then coming back and going like, oh, actually, I didn't do that. Oh, no, I didn't have time for that. It's not nice. It doesn't make you feel good as a client. And, it's not going to be great for your client, your coaching client relationship. So yeah, 3 things at once. And then you set a time for a follow-up, usually about 2 weeks after. And in the follow-up, you would just ask them, give me an update. How have things been? Maybe look at some of the symptoms that they've been struggling with. Are they feeling better or not? Anything else that's new that's come up? And then you look at the plan and say, okay, so last time we agreed that you were going to, go for a walk in your lunch break every day during the week. How's that been? Yeah, that's been great. Da, 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 da. great. If not, like what stopped them from doing it, you know? Or maybe I started off in the really well in the first week, but then not so well in the second week. You know, identify the barriers and then work on how do we remove them. Maybe we need to adjust the plan. Maybe it was too ambitious to begin with. Maybe it's not every day. Maybe it's every, 3 times a week is more realistic for them. You know, just work on those things together. And then you co-create a new plan together. So again, another 3 things. It can be the same as the first. You could build on the first. So maybe they were they were walking every day and they've done it and they feel great. Now they're going to add in a second walk, or they're going to do a yoga video once a week, or whatever it is. You know, just build on that plan. And the client leaves with this to-do list again before, that they're going to implement before they see you next. And that's it. So then you type up your notes. Please type them up. It's very hard for me to read handwriting in certain, in the marking matrix, but also for yourself. I think it's good to type things up because it helps you, organize your thoughts. I've seen some cases where like the notes were just, my notes are chaos, to be fair, but I then kind of type them up and I make I make sense of them. So just just make sure that you type them because especially if I can't read them or if they're messy, that's going to be considered a not yet competent. Make sure you upload your science scope of practice and your insurance in the first one. So the CPA is fine, whatever, whichever one you want. The insurance, if you're in the UK, you need student insurance, which you can get from Balance. You just message them saying that you're a CNM student. It's like £15. You can then, or £20. You can then upgrade to a practitioner insurance once you qualify. But yeah, that's what you need to do. That's all you need to do. You don't need to upload anything until you've done your follow-up with your client. And you don't really, the deadline for uploading things for your intake is the 30th of September. So you don't need to necessarily upload it beforehand if you don't feel ready. Cases won't get marked until after that date, that submission date. So if you upload them earlier, it's not like you'll get feedback for your clients 3 and 4 earlier than that. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Just take your time. And obviously, if you have any questions as you're working through these cases, the ones at home or even any sort of cases that you've done online, feel free to message me and ask me for my opinion or anything like that. I'm always here to help and support you. Is that clear in terms of like clinics and your coaching and anything like that? All good. I wanted to really make sure. Yes.
Sorry. I'm just looking at the forms because our client sessions are just 1 hour long. Is it a good idea to send the coaching contract and the coaching case taking form prior to that session so you've got that information ready? Or is that something we would take in that 1 hour? I'm just thinking of the window and there's a lot of questions to ask.
Coaching contract is fine to send beforehand. The details of the client is also fine to send them. I don't, you don't want to be spending time in your case going, what's your height? What's your weight? Your GP details and that. That's, you can shave off some time by sending them that beforehand, and the food diary, the 3-day diet diary, you can send that to them beforehand. But that's it. I mean, don't send them the case taking procedure with all the questions. Yeah. That's something that you want to take your client through, because a lot of times the discussion and the follow-up questions are what helps you put 2 and 2 together. But also your client goes on a journey and they start piecing the puzzle together as well as you're taking them through. So yeah, coaching contract, client details, medications and supplements, those are fine to send them beforehand. That's sort of that first page with the GP information. And the 3-day diet diary, send it to them before. Yeah, that's fine. Good. Well done. Actually, I forgot to mention that.
There's the other form as well that says the coaching plan. So we've got the actual document where I'm assuming we would type up the official notes at the end of the session, but then there's a separate sheet that says coaching plan.
Yeah, the 3 columns. Yeah.
Is that to take in the session as our notes and to obviously discuss with the client, or is this something that we should be typing up and uploading to our portal?
Yeah, so please upload that. That is what you would send the client after the session, right? So
the coaching plan one.
Okay. Yeah, so you agree with them. Okay, these are the 3 things we're going to do. So you want to improve your sleep. So the action that we're going to do to improve your sleep. So the goal would be improve sleep. The action that's going to be taken is they're going to leave their phone. They're going to switch off their phone at 9 p.m. and leave it outside of their bedroom. and they're going to go and read a book instead. That's the action. Resources, you can add in, I don't know, maybe some book recommendations or, podcasts about phone use and sleep, whatever it is, any sort of thing that can help the client, a resource that can help that client. The other one would be maybe they're going to, they want to improve their energy levels. So they're going to have breakfast every morning because they normally skip it. So then you could say, improve energy levels is the goal. Action is have breakfast, 5 days a week, like on the days that they go to work. And then the resources would be breakfast ideas or recipes or an article of the importance of eating breakfast. I don't know, whatever that is, to set your client up for success. And that would be something that you then send to the client, and the client it's very clear. The actions are very clear. They're going to switch off their phone at 9 p.m. They're going to do that. They're going to go for a walk, a 10-minute walk 5 times a week. They're going to, I'm just thinking about other things that they could, they're going to do the yoga class 3 times a week on a Sunday and, on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I don't know, whatever. The more detailed it is, the easier it is for the client to follow, but also for you to track progress as well. Sometimes I see things like, go to bed earlier. What time? 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock? If it's clear and detailed, then the client knows what they're aiming for, and it's very easy to track progress as well.
Thank you.
No worries. Is there a checklist of all the uploads we need to include? I'm not sure if it's in the, hang on. No, there's a coaching checklist. No, that's not it. I don't think there is one, unless when you're uploading it, there might be a checklist. But all the things that you mentioned here: scope of practice, insurance. That's only for the first case that you upload. Then case taking, coaching plan, 3-day diary would be what we would, if the client has uploaded that, and the nutrition check, the CNM nutrition checklist needs to be uploaded.
Can I ask also?
Yeah.
Clinic in a Box files.
Mm-hmm.
Do you share those with clients as appropriate as parts of the resources?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. The Clinic in a Box files are there to kind of, they're sort of like a startup sort of box for you, a startup group file of resources that you can use with your clients. I would encourage you to actually start creating your own as well as you're doing your cases. Create your have your favorite recipes in like a nice format. I have handouts of things, certain topics that I talk about all the time with my clients. I specialize in women's health and hormones. So there's, articles that I've referred clients to about fertility and exercise. There's an article about progesterone. What I've done is I have taken things and I've put them in my own format. So when I send it to my clients, is in my own, it's not just random links and pages and things like that. But then I will always link the source to where it was found. And obviously any recipes, if they're not mine, then I would link to the source of where they found the book, the website, whatever, the blog that I found, Instagram posts, whatever that I found them on. But I have my own, in the years that I've been practicing, I've kind of accumulated all of this information and tools that I have that I just, that I have in like Word documents where I can then just kind of copy paste and send them off to my clients. But the Clinic in a Box is kind of like your startup. So we've collated some files that you have already on hand to share with them, but don't be afraid to create your own as well.
So if it's a recipe, does it need to be someone else's?
No, it can be yours. No,
It can be yours, right? Okay.
Yeah, of course. I'm not a big recipe creator, I have to say. My recipes are quite basic. I have a lot of recipes from like my mom's recipes that I've kind of copied into my own format, and I share those with my clients. But a lot of the recipes are recipes of book, my favorite recipes from books that I've used, that I do on a regular basis. But if you are, a great cook and come up with your own recipes, then that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that if they're not yours, that you state who they are.
First them.
Don't just steal people's recipes. Yeah.
And can I also ask about exercise recommendations as well?
Yeah.
Advice. What is in scope and out of scope?
So I think again, like the same thing with food, you can give general recommendations for exercise. So maybe the type of exercise that the client is doing is not conducive to their health. Say for example, they're like super stressed and they're doing like spin classes and CrossFit or whatever it is. Maybe that's not the kind of exercise that's working from them in that moment. So recommending other types of exercise, like maybe some more restorative yoga or walking or maybe strength training instead of CrossFit. That's completely within scope. I'm not a PT, so I will link to other PTs, or for example, with yoga, I will give them Yoga with Adriene videos, links, or things like that. But that's within scope. I would say what's outside of scope is unless you are a personal trainer, creating personalized training plans, like do this amount, these amount of reps with these weights or things like that. That's, you don't know unless you're not sure. You can give them sort of some of the things that are recommended in the fitness, maybe as long as they're not too intense, you could get, as a starting point, you could share that with your clients. But, obviously if they want more personalized, the same thing with the diet, if they want more personalized advice on their fitness, then they would need to work with a personal trainer.
Right. And if somebody is trained in something like a PT or a yoga teacher or something like that, and they're doing this course,
Then they can combine the two, yes.
that's okay to do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. If you've got other qualifications, you can use your coaching to help your clients implement these. You don't need to. I'm a nutritional therapist and a health coach. I use coaching within my nutritional therapy, practice. So I combine the two. Obviously, my scope of practice is bigger because I actually am trained. But yeah, if you are a yoga practitioner or a PT, you can 100% give, write out personal training plans for your clients. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
No worries. Right, I'm going to put my email in the chat function, tutor@thehealthcoach.com. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me, and I will see you again. I can't remember when the next one is, probably in a month's time. Yeah, in July, we've got another session on the 15th. But hopefully in the meantime, have a look at your clinic calendar, sign up to do your, your CPAs with one of your colleagues. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is the clients 1 to 4, they can be either students or they can be, friends or family or someone else that you want. So you can decide who these people are. It's up to you to decide. Obviously, if you are working, when you're booking your clinics, the CPA is free, but when you're booking your clinics, you have to, if you're working with a CNM student, it's £20 to book them in for a initial and a follow-up. If it's someone that's outside of CNM, it's £40 for an initial and a follow-up. So just keep that in mind in terms of the budgets, the clients, whether they're willing. But it's still £40 to get a coaching session. 2 coaching sessions is a really great deal, and you're going to be observed by a tutor. So it's going to be they're going to have a supervised coaching sessions on Zoom. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you for my birthday wishes. I can't believe it's tomorrow, but hey, thank you very much. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will speak to you soon. Message me if you have any questions, okay? Have a lovely day. See you later. Bye.